Good morning, gentlemen.
Can you hear
For you
No,
folks
no,
on
I'm not
Zoom,
paying
you
attention
won't
either.
believe
I
it.
got to do this.
I just stood up and the whole room just went quiet. I'm almost afraid to say anything.
Okay, don't.
Okay, don't, Ned Bishop says. That's great. All right. Hey, let's get started. Let's pause for a word of prayer. Good and gracious Heavenly Father, we gather today for this time of good food and fellowship. We thank you. We thank you for all of our blessings. We thank you for this church. Pray for the health of our families and friends. We pray for new leadership in your church and in governments around the world. We pray that those leaders would find wisdom and the path toward reconciliation. And now we thank you for this food. Pray you would bless it to the use of our bodies, be with us, and help us do your service in the world. We ask it in your name. Amen. All right. So first announcement this morning, somebody dropped some forever stamps outside. Do you recognize these, anybody? I'm about to have, oh, there we are. Good. I was going to say I was about to have postage for my Christmas cards. I do not. Thank you very much. All right. I know Elmer Stansel said he has an announcement.
I just wanted to follow up from last week about the church-wide picnic, which will be the 18th next Sunday. The church-wide picnic will be May 18th, next Sunday. We have a lot of guys with the Holy Smokers that are having graduation for their kids this weekend and next weekend. And so we need some help. If you're available to help, we have lots of things to do on both Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And if you'd like to help and be a part of that, just see me. We had an email that went out yesterday. You might have received that email about kind of some of the activities that'll be going on in preparation for Sunday's picnic meal. So just see me afterwards. I'll be glad to put you on the list. Thank you.
If you've never participated in that, I highly recommend it. Bert, I see you online. Do you have an announcement about next week?
Yes, I expect to make my return in person next week, and we will have a speaker. Details to follow.
Thank you kindly, Bert. We appreciate that. Anybody that's never been in this position should not be laughing. This is not funny. Okay. We do have a first-time visitor with us today, is a new member, Jimmy Smith. Jimmy, you want to stand and be recognized? Jimmy's joining the church. Clark Goodwin talked him into coming, so welcome, Jimmy. The rule here is the first time you're welcomed. The next time we'll get you a name tag. The third time you're the speaker, so work on your presentation. Well, yeah, like, today we could count twice and you could talk to Bert about maybe.
I'll be in touch with Jimmy.
Okay. Our speaker this morning is Joel Kraft. Joel's been a Trinity member for 12-ish years, sings in the choir. His, the number one attribute that makes Joel a very important person is he's married to Martha. Thank you. Yeah. Joel's had a very interesting career and a real interest in airplanes and has had a lot of experience in training related issues relating to pilots and airplanes. He is a certified pilot. And so he's going to speak to us this morning. Joel Kraft.
Are we on? Yes. Folks, to let you know, I have a tendency to speak really, really fast. So there's an assignment for this table right here. If I start to speak too fast, I just go slow down. So apologize ahead of time. A few acronyms and terms I'll be using throughout the presentation. ATC stands for Air Traffic Control, sometimes called whatever's in Atlanta Center, LA Center. The stations are not at the airport. For example, the one in Atlanta is actually down in Hampton, Georgia, and it's just an enclosed room, no windows, but a lot of people there. And the personnel responsible for flights in large swaths of the United States, for actually there and for the Atlanta, Georgia, part of Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee. So it's a huge area they're responsible for. Second acronym or second name, flight deck. Some people call it the cockpit. The flight deck is actually anything from the pilot's door forward. The cockpit, however, is only from their seats forward. So that's just a little small minor technical difference between the two. Flight level, and this is important later on in a couple of reasons. When you're flying below 18,000 feet, all flights are listed in the actual feet. For example, I'm at 5,000 feet. I'm at 7,500 feet. But when you get above 18,000 feet, they're abbreviated, use the term flight level, and they're listed at hundreds of feet. So you'd say flight level 300, which is 30,000 feet, or flight level, 20, 25, 250, flight level 250. And I'm sorry, they say all three digits are separate. So you don't say 25, you'll say 250. Aircraft flying at 18,000 feet or above do not fly at 500-foot increments because you have to have separation for aircraft that are going that fast. I worked at Delta. How do you work this? There we go. I worked at Delta for over 30 years, with 20 years as a technical writer for manuals to fly the planes. I have written for and passed the Delta's ground school, which is a systems and instrument knowledge for the Boeing 717, the 737, the 757, the 767, the 767-400, and the 777. I've also written manuals for the Airbus 220, the A320, and the A330, and the MD-88 and the MD-90. I earned my private pilot's license in 2001, flying a single-engine Piper Cherokee 180. I have over 200 hours of flight time, and my girlfriend, Martha, who is now my wife, was actually my first passenger. She said she felt completely safe. So I feel very vindicated in what I'm able to do. Mark Twain said it the best. How does it fly? In a word, aerodynamics. Although it may seem magical to some people, flying is all about physics and aerodynamics. The kite effect, did I bypass? I think I did. No, the kite effect is the air force pushing up on the wing. So you're flying into the wind, so the wind is pushing up onto the wing, and in some respects, the fuselage. Then there's the Bernoulli principle, and it states that, and I'm going to read the fancy language for you, that an increase in the speed of a parcel of fluid, air, occurs simultaneously with a decrease in either the pressure or the height above a datum. Fancy language to say, when an air flows faster over the upper side of the wing, it's cambered like this. So when it flows faster over the upper side of the wing, it speeds up, which creates a low pressure area, which basically sucks the aircraft upwards. The angle of attack of a wing, I may have gotten these out of order. Angle of attack of a wing indicates an aircraft will ascend, descend, or maintain level flight. The wing will generate lift. Well, apparently I've lost a page of my notes. Anyway, four forces of flight, I'll back up a little bit. Four forces are lift, thrust, drag, or weight. Lift is what's being produced in an upward, and that's with the Bernoulli principle and the kite effect. Thrust is the forward motion provided by the propeller or the jet. The drag is two types of drag. You have parasitic drag, which is like the antenna, the wings themselves, any that are causing it to be pulled backwards. And then the weight is the weight, gravity in a word. That's the three axes for flight. Vertical is your aircraft going up or down. The nose is pointing upwards or downwards. Longitudinal, that's your roll, side to side. And lateral, and that's actually sometimes it's called yaw. And that comes important later on when we're talking about crosswinds. There's that screen. Okay, so the airflow, it goes faster over the top, creates a low pressure, sucks the aircraft upwards. Angle of attack. If you notice in this first screen, it's the first panel, it's normal. Now you notice this starts, when it starts getting higher and higher and higher, it starts getting disrupted because this is no longer smooth. And this one is just completely disrupted, so you're going to start losing altitude. Not good. And you go into a stall. Vortices. When airflow leaves the wings, it rotates in an outward spiral motion due to the fact that the wing decreases the size as it progresses toward the tip. The larger the surface, the larger the vortices. This is why you always leave sufficient room behind other aircraft when you're taking off. You say, why can't they take off sooner? Because they've created vortices and you're going to get caught in that. It's not fun. I've been in it before. It's not fun. And if you've seen if you've seen videos of aircraft taking off, you notice it has that spiral motion. Or if it's going through a cloud, that's what's happened. Those are the wingtip vortices that are happening on them. On a positive note, vortices are good, provide a small lift to objects flying behind the side and to the side. And this is why you see geese flying in the V formation, because they're taking the advantage of the vortices from the goose in front of them. So they just, and then they trade out places. Since vortices create drag, you sometimes have winglets. And wingtip vortices are modulated via wingtips. The air flows over the wing, backwards and outwards, and when it reaches the end of the wing, it is deflected upwards and disrupted so it reduces drag. So you have fuel economy. Come on. Every airport has a unique identifying code, so you know where you're going. Some of them some are easy to guess. For example, ATL, JFK, John F. Kennedy Airport, MIA, LAX, Los Angeles. The X is thrown in there simply because they needed a 3-letter code and they just added a random letter, so they didn't figure anybody's going to use an X. Some are not so easy. CVG. That's CDG, CVG, Charlie Victor. No, Cincinnati, because it's actually in Covington, Kentucky. MCO, Orlando. Why? Named after Colonel McCoy. My uncle actually flew with him. ORD.
Chicago O'Hare.
Hello. It was originally an apple orchard. Some are just random letters and number. EWR. Newark. No idea why they call it Newark. And then where I flew out of, 7GA7, which is Berry Hill down in Stockbridge, Georgia. It's a little small private airplane. Runways are based on, there we go. They're magnetic heading for takeoff and landing, rounded to the nearest 10 degrees. So for an example, this one, runway, I'm in the way, sorry guys. Oh, you can see it. Runway 20 is actually at a heading of 200 degrees magnetic. It may be 202, it may be 198, but it's rounded off. So it's runway 20. If you're landing it going the opposite direction, it's, the opposite direction, so it's minus 180 degrees. So that wouldn't be runway 2, going the opposite direction would be runway 2. So if you're on runway 32, the opposite of that is going to be, somebody help me with math. I should have picked a different number. Additionally, sometimes in really large airports, you'll see them have, like you see the L here. If they have parallel runways, it's the left one or the right one. So again, you can, remember I said you're taking off with vortices behind you? You don't want to land behind somebody, but they want to land people faster. So you're landing aircraft alternating on each one. So that's why you have multiple runways. And then again, with the opposite direction, left and right, the other way. Threshold markings. This is the absolute, this is not where you land. This is the threshold. That's the end of the runway. So if you're coming in and you said, I'm not going to make that, guaranteed you're going to crash into the dirt. So don't do that. This is actually the touchdown zone, and this is the aim point. That's the earliest you're allowed to touch, you're supposed to touch down. This is what you're aiming for when you're in a pilot, when you're flying. You set a point out there and you just aim for that point. And if you hit that point, you should land just past the touchdown mark. These stripes, by the way, will tell you how wide. There are different number of stripes for the different, this happens to be 100 feet wide, this runway. There are also taxiways, and you've seen these when you've been flying. Whoop, one too many, come on. Taxiways are numbered, they're not numbered, they're lettered. So if you're you're driving along, taxiing along, and you say, oh, look, there's an A, what does that mean? There's an M, what does that mean? Well, they have names for the, and it's the alphabet, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, taxiways. And that keeps people, smaller airports don't have taxiways, so you must back taxi on the runway, which is what we did at my airport, which means you land, turn around, use the runway you just landed on, and come back up to the landing, to your parking spot. More on that later, remember that. I flew a Cherokee 180, and this is the instrument panel for it. Although it looks like a lot, it's really not. You get used to it. Left side is instrumentation for the flying the aircraft. Right side is communications. Required air on any aircraft, not just the Cherokee, required for any aircraft. Altimeter. Standard setting is 29, it's a 4-digit number, 29.92. And the nomenclature is, a lot of times you just leave out the point. So your altitude, your barometer is, altimeter is 2992. And it's based on barometric pressure. So low pressure area, it's going to have a smaller number. High pressure area is going to have a higher number. Since barometric pressure changes, pilots must reset the altimeter before takeoff on every flight and prior to landing, actually prior to approach, on flights over a significant distance. When flying at flight level 180 and above, all altimeters are set to 2992. And the reason is because you're flying with other big aircraft that are flying really fast. And you say, well, you're going to go up if you hit a high pressure area, you're going to go down if you hit a low pressure area. Well, that's okay because everybody is doing the same thing. But that's so that you're not having to constantly change it. I'm going through high pressure area, change it. I'm going through low pressure area. No, everybody is going up and down at the same speed. Airspeed indicator. How fast are you going? Both in relation to the earth, ground speed, and in relation to the air mass you're flying at airspeed. For example, if you have a severe headwind, your airspeed will be a lot higher than your ground speed because it's blowing you backwards. Same thing as you're flying in a tailwind. This is why if you're flying from Atlanta to LA, it takes 5 hours and 10 minutes. But if you're flying LA to Atlanta, it takes 4 hours and 40 minutes. You're saying, why the difference? Because you're in the jet stream coming back. Y'all have seen it on the, the weather maps. The jet stream dips down. You fly the jet stream and you fly, you're screaming along. But everybody else is screaming along at the same speed, so it's no big deal. Tachometer. It tells you how fast your engine is rotating. Good to know, so if you don't make the engine work too hard. Oil pressure gauge. It tells you how much pressure do you have. The engine requires a certain pressure to operate. If the pressure is too high, or if it drops too low, which indicates an oil leak, land now. It's like the check engine on your car. Don't run it. Not a good plan. Oil temperature. Same kind of thing. Can't have it too high, too low. Same thing as for the pressure. The compass. Everybody makes fun of these. Allows you to navigate, self-explanatory. This is based off of magnetic north, not true north. So if you notice, there's true north, but there's magnetic north. So it's quite different, and it's a little bit, and it's based, it moves because of the Earth's core rotation. Creates the magnetic field, and it moves around just based on the thing. And it gets updated every few years, and it got most recently updated in 2024. Other instruments. And this, I use it because this is the aircraft I flew in, I'm custom. Turn and slip indicator tells you, turn, are you turning? Are you properly? Or are you're sort of sliding? If you've ever been like in a car and you're trying to turn on a wet pavement and you start slipping, or what do they call it? Hydroplane, or not, there's another name for it. The dragsters do it now. Drifting, thank you. It's like drifting. That's a slip turn coordinator. Turn coordinator is similar is similar, but it also tells you if you're in a roll, if you're doing this number, because you could be either drifting or you could actually be in a roll, which you want to be to turn. Attitude indicator tells you if you're going up or down. Do you see sky? Do you see trees? Hopefully, the only time you see trees is when you're landing. Heading indicator indicates the way you're pointing, not necessarily the way you're going. Because if you have a crosswind, and I've been caught in one before, the crosswind is coming from this direction, but you're trying to go there. If you point it directly at there, the wind's going to blow you. So what you do is you angle slightly into the wind so that even though you think you're going that way by what your heading indicator says, you're actually flying that way because it's pushing you sideways. Vertical speed indicator. If you're going up or down and how fast are you doing either one? If that puppy is spinning like a clock, like a top, you got a problem. When you get in your car, what's your checklist when you get in your car? Anybody? Seatbelt, mirrors, gas, check engine light. Okay, so that's like what, 6 or 7 things you check for, and we just do it out of habit. We've been doing it for so long. For the Cherokee 180, the initial checklist has 12 steps. Not a whole lot. Exterior checklist, you check and make sure that all the aircraft parts are there and they're all secured. 13 steps. The interior checklist has 11 steps. Now, let's get fancy. This is the overhead panel for 757. If you ever, if you're getting on the aircraft and you look and say, what do all those things mean? Well, this is the overhead panel. This is the instrument panel. It's kind of a composite. I couldn't make it work out really well. But that's what you see in front of the pilots, right? What they're looking at directly sitting in front of them. And then you have the center pedestal. All this is stuff that you learn. And yes, I have learned it. It's a lot of learning to do. Some of the steps in the pre-flight procedure for the 757 have multiple items. For example, you're going to check fuel panel. And that, I should have shown you the fuel panel. Check, but you're checking for quantity, pressure, valves, temperature, all these sorts of things. So it sounds like a little bit, but it's actually a whole lot. So you're thinking, what are the pilots doing up there while we're getting on board? This is what they're doing. The interior inspection has 23 steps or items to check. The exterior procedure has 88 items to check. This is why you see the pilot wandering around the aircraft before you take off. One of the pilots, that's what he's doing. He's checking to make sure the tire's there. He's making sure this. He's making sure there's a pin that says pull before flight. That comes up later. Remember that. Pre-flight procedure, and you have the pre-flight procedure for the pilot flying, and they can switch. Like sometimes it's this guy's turn, sometimes it's this guy's turn to fly. They just take turns flying so that everybody gets flight time. Pilot flying has 54 steps. Pilot monitoring has 36 steps. The captain has 18 steps, and the first officer has 18 steps. So there's a lot of things that they have to check up front. This is just the pre-flight checklist, and you can't read it, but this just to show you how many items, just the pre-flight checklist for pilots. Their checklist for every phase of flight. There's actually a separate manual at Delta that contains what we call non-normals. Have you got low hydraulic pressure? Have you got a decompression? Have you, believe it or not, there's one for engine fire, you hope. So there's all the, and it's a relatively big book. Now we talk about the fun stuff. This is where I wish that, and Scott and I could not make, and I just messed that up. We couldn't make this work. This is a video of crosswind landings. And you see, and y'all may have seen it before, an aircraft is coming in for landing, and the runway is this way, and it's landing in here, and at the last second, it kicks it, you kick it out. In the case of a crosswind, the pilot can choose to land in either crab, which is this right, what I was talking about, crab. You fly in and then kick it out at the last second. Using this requires judgment as to when and or where the aircraft's going to land. So it's a little more difficult in terms of timing, but I happen to like it better than the other one, which is the wing down attitude, which means you actually fly into the wind with a little bit of cross rudder. The wind's coming from this direction. You're going to land into it because, as you see in this picture, they almost hit the wing. Never a good thing. I'd much rather kind of jiggle the passengers a little bit than scrape the wing on the Never a good idea. And in this video, it had a trivia question. What is the largest plane in the world? Thank you. Yes, it is the Russian AN-225 Mira. It has 6 engines, 32 wheels, and weighs 600 tons, which is 1.2 million pounds. And they showed it landing. It's like, you're not on the ground. Yes. Okay, fun airports that are airports that are tricky to fly. I'm going to say fun because if you're the pilot, it's not fun at all. Lukla Airport in Nepal is situated near Mount Everest. Its elevation is over 9,000 feet, and the runway is only 1,600 feet long, which is less than half a mile, more like a quarter of a mile. There's a mountain wall on one end, right here, and a plunge, a 2,000-foot plunge over there. So if you mess up, you got a long way to wait till you hit the ground. Bhutan. This airport is surrounded by 18,000-foot mountains, and you don't have visual contacts until moments before landing. There is no radar, so the airport operates only during the day and only in good weather. Pilots have to fly using a series of landmarks for navigation, and you're required to fly a 45-degree bank angle, which is, you think you're on a roller coaster ride. It's really steep. Because of that, there are only about 24 pilots qualified to fly there. So you can see it right here. You fly in around there, and all of a sudden, boom, there you are. Surprise! Courchevel in France. This airport is 6,500 feet in the Alps. The runway is only 1,700 feet long and has an 18-degree slope. And that's, most airports in the US have a 1-degree slope, and that's just for helping you a little push off. There are no lights or instrument age, which make clear weather a must. And for some of the guys that are really, really sharp, James Bond people, do you recognize this? The movie Tomorrow Never Dies. It's in the opening scene. Ronaldo Airport in Portugal. Remember I told you about crosswind landings? This airport, because it's on the coast and has mountains, you see mountains in the background, it has either waves coming off the mountain or incoming crosswinds from the ocean. So that makes it terribly fun. Dutch Caribbean, Saba. Similar to Ronaldo, this airport experiences severe crosswind and turbulence at, you're going to get this, 1,312 feet, less than a quarter of a mile. It's the world's shortest commercial runway. But the displaced threshold, remember I told you don't land at the very tip end, you land further down. The displaced threshold makes it only 1,263 feet, which is less than the distance from here to the traffic light at Northside Drive. And you're landing a commercial aircraft there. Not this part of we. Takeoffs for landing requires precise turns, late flares, and maximum braking. Takeoffs require maximum engine spool up before releasing the brakes, which means that you step on the brakes, and you'll experience this if you've ever flown out of San Diego. They stand on the brakes and they say, ladies and gentlemen, we're within the capability of the aircraft. And then they just run up the engine as far as it can go. So it's finally going at full speed. And then they just release the brakes, and coming out of San Diego, it's really funny. You see the people that have been there before. It's like they're on a roller coaster ride. They raise their hands in the air. They're just having a great time. This one, in Greenland. I'm not going to even try to pronounce that airport. Anybody that speaks Greenland, give it a shot. All those airports only 100 feet above sea level, and you can see it right, it's that little bitty tiny right there. But look at it, it's covered by glaciers. The biggest threat can be the extreme cold, creating fog, snow, sleet, and icing. And the nearby volcanoes add to the fun. The airport in St. Martin, although it's not terribly difficult to land at, it's one of the more famous ones because this is what people see. Planes cross the beach at altitudes of only 30 to 60 feet, which is a 3 to 6 foot tall apartment building. A 3 or 6 story apartment building, which is not terribly large. And the blast can send people on the beach tumbling. And you'll see them, they hang on to this, either the railing or the fence, and just, they're stuck out, blown out backwards. This one's I had to throw one from the US, had to. San Francisco. It's not terribly hard to fly in and out of, but you're on the coast. But the kicker is, there's the end of the runway, there's the bay. So you've got to come in a precise glide path, because if you don't, you're going swimming. Emergency situations. The term Mayday is actually an Englishized version of the French word Mayday, which is help me. This is to be used in transmission of emergency situations that can have fatal consequences, either, for example, loss of an engine, loss of structural integrity, fire on board, depleted fuel, sorts of. So, pan is an urgent situation. It's not, you're not in an emergency situation. You're not going to come falling out of the sky, but it's urgent, medical emergency or something. Or you're lost. And what happens then is all the pilots hear pan, and everybody drops off the frequency. Because if you've ever heard chatter, it's like this person, then that person, then this person, then that person, then that plane, then that plane. Everybody drops off, so it's just you and the controller talking to each other. When faced with an emergency, pilots are taught to do three things, and it's a rhyming. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Aviate, fly the plane. Don't hit anything, preferably not the earth. Navigate, figure out where you are versus where you want to go. More on that one later. Communicate, establish radio contact with ATC, air traffic control, and then talk to passengers if necessary. So if you're ever on a flight that does a rejected takeoff or a go around, y'all ever been on one? I have. You're landing like, what happened? What happened? And you don't hear anything. Well, what's going on? Well, they're probably busier than a one-arm paper hanger up in the front, so just wait. They'll let you know when they can. There are 4 C's for emergency contact. Communicate, confess, coordinate, and comply. For example, once I went on a cross-country flight, I was blown off course. I had an unexpected crosswind, again with a crosswind. So I called them up and said, I confess. I said, look, guys, I'm lost. I'm blown off course. Coordinate. They said, okay, turn this heading right there, and you'll find it. You'll get you to destination. And then comply. Do what they tell you to do. Don't just, well, I know what I'm doing. They don't know. Transponder codes are 4-digit codes that the aircraft continually transmits so the ATC can control them, can contact them. Have you ever seen, you'll see like a map of the US and they have little icons of planes floating around? This is because they know the transponder codes for those aircraft. It's only big aircraft that fly above 18,000 feet. My little aircraft is so small, and I'm flying under visual flight rules. All small aircraft transmit 1200. These codes are assigned for every flight and will change based on ATC requirements. There are 3 emergency transponder codes that a pilot can squawk, and these are important later. 7500, used for unlawful interference, hijackings only. 7600, loss of communication. ATC will alert other aircraft in the area so they can remain clear, and also the intended landing run airport so they can coordinate visual sighting measures. What that means is I'm basically deaf and dumb. You can't hear me, I can't hear you. So if you say, hey, you need to turn left or right, I can't hear you. And so what they do is they get everybody out, again, get everybody out of the way. 7700, used for all other emergencies, for example, low fuel, loss of engine, fire on board, flight control problems, pressurization, medical emergencies, all that sort of thing. But when you squawk, and it actually makes a when you press the button. If you just change it, if you ident, it means you just change the number, and they'd have to look and see where you are. But if it goes, that lets everybody in control room, something's up, pay attention. So that's why it's called squawk. Now we're going to talk, y'all remember this one. September 11th, there were 2,996 immediate casualties, 2,753 at the Twin Towers, including 343 firefighters, 184 at the Pentagon, and 40 in a field outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The F-15 fighter jets were scrambled from Otis Air Base, Massachusetts. They were taken apart in a regularly scheduled drill named Exercise Vigilant Guardian. They were scrambled at 8:47 and were airborne at 8:53. There was radio chatter about the fighter jets going kamikaze as a last resort. I mean, that's what they're trained to do. It's not a good idea, but if you run out of munitions, you have no choice. They were cleared, the 2 pilots and Duffy and his wingman, Nash, were cleared weapons hot, meaning all safety pins were pulled. I'm sorry, guys, I get very clear every time I tell you this. All safety pins are pulled, your missiles are hot, your guns are hot, your machine guns are hot. Upon takeoff, they immediately went full afterburner. Sorry. And Duffy said in an interview that at 400 feet above ground level, which is the height of a 40-story building, and you're about a mile and a half, 2 miles off the end of the runway, maybe a mile off the end of the runway, his wingman called up and said, "Hey, Duff, you know you've gone super," meaning supersonic, which means the speed of sound in ground level is 761 miles an hour. So within less than a mile and 40-story building, he has now broke the sound barrier. You are hauling at that speed, 761 miles an hour. When he called up and said, "Hey, Duff, you know you've gone super," his response was, "Yeah, so?" They had to wait until civilian aircraft were clear before they could get over the bay. I had co-workers who were actually stationed at Dobbins Air Force Base at the time, and they said that everybody, all leave was canceled, and everybody, the cooks, the janitors, everybody had their sidearms with them. You don't know, we're under attack. Question, what was the most famous unsolved hijacking? 1971, Seattle. Thank you, yes, D.B. Cooper. He hijacked Northwest Airlines Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. He presented a note to the stewardess, which was the flight attendant, saying he had a bomb and showed her the contents of his briefcase, which was full of wires and things. He demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. I don't know. Was he going to take somebody with on a trip? After allowing all passengers to the plane in Seattle, he had the crew fly to Mexico City. About 30 minutes into that flight, he lowered the air stairs in the back and parachuted into the night. False alarm. About 4 hours after the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington, Korean Airline Flight 85 entered Alaskan airspace. There were 200 passengers and crew on board. For reasons that are unclear, they started broadcasting the 7500 emergency code, which is hijacking. Now, if the hijacker is in the flight deck and he's got a gun to your head and he says, "Don't tell me you're being hijacked," you're not going to say, "Hi, I'm being hijacked." You've got it. So they have to get creative in ways to say, "Okay, what's going on? Are you sure you're okay?" The protocol is to try and establish radio communication with the flight crew and then launch fighter jets. The pilots would intercept the aircraft and try to communicate via hand signals. And if the hand signals, we can't hear you, speak to me. And if that doesn't work, they actually rotate to the side and let you see that they're loaded with missiles. Never a good plan to mess with that. 2 F-15s were scrambled from Elmendorf Air Force Base to intercept. Lieutenant General Nordy Schwartz was prepared to have the civilian aircraft shot down. At that time, he was one of only 5 people in the United States authorized to do so. And I didn't know this, a whole swath of downtown Anchorage and the Valdez pipeline terminal were evacuated. The Canadian State Department was notified, and the Canadian Air Force launched 2 CF-18s to join the pursuit. Sorry. After communications were established, it was determined that it was a false alarm, and the passenger jet was directed to Whitehorse, Alaska. Passengers and crews were all interviewed and cleared. Although no audio tapes of the prior communication were released, the crew said that they were directed by Anchorage ATC to use the code. Nobody let you know. Northwest Airlines flight, and I don't remember the number, trust but verify. Newfoundland's Gander Control Center noticed that Wings Airlines transponder was putting up random codes, one of which was 7500. But the crew didn't know it. Gander said, "Confirm your squawking 7500. Interpreting that as a clearance, the first officer says, complied and entered 7500. Roger, 7500. Now you're really in an emergency situation. The captain didn't know because he was taking a restroom break at the time. Soon the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada and England were all notified and awakened. Northwest executives had to figure out a way to learn about the situation without attracting the attention of any hijackers. Remember I said you can't just say, "Yeah, we've got a hijacker right here." Boom. So they sent a message saying, "Weather looks good. How are you feeling?" The pilots thought it was some kind of joke, so they responded with, "It's dark and we are scared." And then they went out of radio communication. It's like, oh no. So by the time they landed in England, so they can't intercept them, by the time they've landed in England, you have basically the entire British Army out there. They were met by 2 RAF fighter pilots, and they've landed off at a different field. When you're still in a hijacking situation, you leave the flaps up. Well, they weren't paying attention. They put the flaps down, which means like, oh my God, we're still in a hijacking situation. So they directed them off, and the tanks showed up, and the bazookas showed up. They finally figured out it was, oops. It's just, well, we thought they said, "Oh, sorry." So trust, but verify. Did you really mean for us to say that? One of the most deadly aircraft to aircraft, always repeat instructions from the controller. March 27, 1977. I remember this one. Both aircraft had been diverted to Los Rodeos Airport on the island of Tenerife due to a bomb explosion at their intended landing destination of Gran Canaria Airport. Los Rodeos was a much smaller airport and was not designed to handle the number of diverted aircraft. Some of them were parked on the taxiways, which necessitated aircraft passing the runway to do a back taxi. Remember I told you about that? You land on the runway, turn around, and get off the runway to come back to the controlled area. There were patches of thick fog around, creating confusion with tower-to-aircraft communications. The KLM aircraft began taking off on the mistaken belief he had been given clearance from the ATC, but before the Pan Am had cleared the runway. The accident killed all 248 people above KLM and 335 of the 396 people above the Pan Am flight. So you always, and this is why if you've ever listened, you can listen to YouTube videos, you know, so-and-so and so, Delta 73 Heavy, taxi runway, blah, blah, or taxi Mike, taxiway Mike. And they repeat, Delta 7, you know, whatever Heavy, using taxiway Mike, Roger. So they heard it, you repeated it back to them. Always repeat. I do not want to try to pronounce this mountain, Takamaghara, so I tried it anyway. Proper maintenance is critical. August 12th, 1985. 12 minutes into a flight from Tokyo to Osaka, Japan Airlines Flight 123 suffered severe structural failure, which means a large section of the tail was ripped off, and an explosive decompression, which is much more violent than a rapid decompression. Explosive, I mean, it's an explosion. After flying under minimal control for 32 minutes, it crashed in the area of Mount whatever, 62 miles from Tokyo. 520 of the 524 people on the flight were killed. The subsequent investigation determined it was a faulty repair completed 7 years prior. Proper maintenance. In this photo taken about 6 minutes before the crash, let me get out of the way, you can see the vertical stabilizer is missing. So, I mean, they had no control of the aircraft, basically. They were gliding and praying and, you know, using, so it's amazing they kept it in the air that long. Eminville, France. Pre-flight procedures are a must. In other words, don't rush. In 1974, the plane was en route from Istanbul to London. An incorrectly secured cargo door at the rear of the airplane burst open and broke off, causing an explosive decompression. It crashed into the forest 23 miles outside of Paris, killing all 346 passengers and crew on board. When the door blew off, the primary and both backup sets of cables were severed, destroying the pilot's ability to control the elevator, runways, and number 2 engine. So follow the procedures. Don't skip anything, and there's more on that later. Bombs. This was pre-TSA, so don't complain about long lines. And actually, y'all know the TSA was created by the Aviation and Transportation Security Act in November of 1991. So less than 3 months after the attack, it was law. TSA was created, which for Congress is really fast. In 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 was en route from Frankfurt to London to New York to Detroit when a bomb on board exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland. It killed all 259 people on board and 11 people on the ground. And you can see that's where it landed, and that's where it stopped. I mean, it just huge gouge in the earth. This one's a little longer. Air France Flight 447 was en route from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. Inconsistent airspeed indications and miscommunication led the crew to stalling the aircraft, and the crew failed to recover from the stall. All 228 passengers and crew on board died. It took over 2 years to recover the black boxes, which are really not black, they're orange, but they just call them a black box. I don't know why, because orange box sounds weird. And due to the aircraft ocean depth in the area involved. Investigators concluded the aircraft airspeed indicators likely became obstructed with ice crystals, causing the autopilot to disconnect. First officer was flying the plane because the captain was on a break at the time. You rotate pilots throughout break. And he got an indication that he was dropping. So and they have a joystick, so he pulled back on the joystick, and it starts raising the aircraft. And his speed's still not going. He's not realizing, this is when you look outside the aircraft, what am I doing? I'm climbing. Why am I climbing? What am I inside? What am I meters say that something's not right here. Something doesn't feel good. It shows an upward attitude. So drop the nose. If you start losing altitude, I mean, if you start going too, remember I told you if you start going too steep, you start losing altitude and you need more speed. We can add speed either to engine or you drop the nose. Well, he didn't do either. So they just kept climbing and climbing. Average altitude for a commercial aircraft is somewhere 33,000, 34,000 feet. He was at 42,000 feet when the captain finally showed back up in the cockpit. So, I mean, he's at the max altitude of that aircraft. That aircraft is not designed to go any higher than that. The captain realized something's going screwy. What's going on? What's going on? And he said, you know, we're losing speed. We're losing speed. The speed had dropped from 315 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour. Yeah, you're basically going to start flying. And that's what happened. They were just falling, but like, you know, slowly, like a leaf falls down to the ground. And they were doing this number. The aircraft stall warning entered. And he realized the aircraft was up at a 40 degrees nose up attitude, but still descending, probably due to the loss of lift. Captain finally realized what he was doing, gets in the seat and says, no. So the captain says, okay, I need airspeed. So he pushes forward. Well, for some reason, the first officer kept pulling backwards. And now you have opposing forces, which they cancel each other out, which means the aircraft, last thing it heard was, go up. So it's still trying to go up. And the captain finally realizes what he's doing. He said, no, don't ascend. But by that point, it was too late. And they crashed, belly landed into the belly first at 282 miles an hour into the ocean. Don't get tunnel vision. Look outside the cockpit. In 1972, and I remember this one too, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 from JFK to Miami experienced control flight into terrain. Control flight into terrain means the aircraft is perfectly flying, but for some reason you weren't paying attention and you flew it into the ground. Into the Everglades. The entire crew became engrossed in determining the reason for a burnout landing gear indicator. All three crew members were heads down and failed to notice that the autopilot had disconnected. One of them actually accidentally hit it with his arm. And ATC kept saying, do you know what you're doing? Yeah, we know what we're doing. Are you really sure you want to do that? Yeah, they're thinking, we're looking for the reason for the burnout bulb. And ATC is saying, you're going down into the ground. Despite multiple calls from ATC, the aircraft descended and crashed into the swamp, killing 96 of the 163 passengers on board. This one did not involve, there were no deaths in this one, but always complete the entire checklist. At Delta, the policy is if you're in the middle of a checklist and for some reason you get distracted, a flight attendant comes and says, you know, we got, you know, passenger wants this, or, you know, they're checking, they're going to add more baggage here. Here's your latest whatever report. If any reason they come in the middle of a checklist, remember I showed you how long that checklist was? Start it over so you don't miss anything at all. You must repeat it. You must repeat it from the beginning. And my instructor did this to me one time just to do it, to see if I would pay attention. And he started talking to me and he wanted to see if I kept going, and I said, hang on, let me just start over. He's like, okay, good. In 2018, a pilot failed to correctly set the altimeter, causing the aircraft to experience control flight into terrain. Remember I said you set the altimeter every time before you take off and before you land? He didn't reset it. The plane was a total loss, although with no fatalities. It was a perfectly good aircraft. Unknown causes. Amelia Earhart. Earhart, the first woman to fly across the Atlantic in a plane as a passenger. She was the first woman to fly solo across North America. The first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. The first person to fly solo from Hawaii to USA. Disappeared on her second attempt to fly around the world. With her manager, navigator Fred Noonan, she left Miami on June 1st, 1937, flying west to east. So she went down through South America, Africa, Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia. And then they took off for Howland, landed in New Guinea on June 29th. On July 2nd, they took off for Howland Island. I don't know where that is, somewhere in the South Pacific. After 20 hours, they had positioned Coast Guard ships to act as navigators for her because, you know, they didn't have the fancy navigations they do now. There's no GPS. So they said, okay, fly to that next light. Oh, there's the light down there. Okay, fly to the next. Okay, there's the light down there. Well, for some reason, she had new equipment on her aircraft that they had only given her just a little bit of instruction on, and she didn't know how to use it. So they're trying to talk to the ships, and she's talking to ground control, and they're saying, you know, you should be seeing the island soon. And she says, I don't see anything. After 20 hours, I don't see anything. Are you sure? We've got aircraft, and they're sending Morse code to her and they're transmitting to her, but because she doesn't know how to operate the new system, they think she can't find it. And the best guess is most investigators believe the aircraft simply ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean. Malaysian Airways. 2014. You remember that 777 coming out of Kuala Lumpur? It was there, and then it wasn't there. Nobody knows. Was it, this is after the Egyptian air, remember that the guy had taken over and the last thing you heard him say was, Allah Akbar, God is great, and he crashed into the ground. They don't know if somebody did that. They don't know if it was a bomb. Nobody knows. Northwest Airlines flight. It was from Tacoma, Washington to Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. About 2.5 hours into the flight, the crew requested clearance to climb from 14,000 feet to 18,000 feet. Controllers indicated there was traffic at that altitude, but the crew never responded. Did they run into the other aircraft? Nobody knows. From Cork, Ireland to London's Heathrow Airport, 45 minutes into the flight, the pilots reported at 12,000 feet, spinning rapidly. If they say spinning rapidly, that means you've gone in either a flat spin or you're spiraling down into the earth. It crashed in the Irish Sea. Although there are many theories, including drone strike, errant missiles, control failure on the left side, nothing has been conclusively proven. Southwest Airlines, South African Airways, en route from Taiwan to Mauritius. Anybody know how to pronounce that correctly? Thank you. The crew reported smoke in the aircraft. Controllers heard the crew trying to control the emergency, then silence. Probably burned up. But again, nobody knows. Come on. Payne Stewart. Do y'all remember this one? It lost contact, and then they sent chase planes up to locate it, and all they saw was just fog in the windows, which indicates that probably it's had a rapid decompression. And since you're not required to fly with your with your oxygen masks on, because it's a pressurized aircraft, everybody lost consciousness. They were unable to reestablish communications, and apparently the last thing into the autopilot was a climb, so it climbed up to 46,000 feet, which is way above a commercial aircraft height, until it ran out of fuel and flew into a field in South Dakota at near supersonic speed. They just saw fog in the windows and nobody was at the controls. They say there are no controls. The plane's not moving, it's not rotating, it's not anything, it's just flying and it's just descending. Which indicates to me, again, with my vast experience, right, that it was on autopilot, and the last thing it told it, was start climbing at 2,000 feet a minute or 1,000 feet a minute, start climbing. And it kept doing that because that's the last thing it was told. And the Airbus A220 actually has a design to it. It's called the Stewart control, the Stewart emergency. So what it does is if it says something's going wrong, there's an emergency decompression, or there's no control input to the aircraft for the next 5 minutes or so, it automatically descends. It will take you down to 10,000 feet, which you can breathe at 10,000 feet. And the reason you can breathe at 10,000, everybody says there's not enough oxygen up high to breathe. There's plenty of oxygen up high to breathe. The problem is there's not enough air pressure to put it into your lungs. So when you're down at 10,000 feet, it's got enough air pressure and it can put it into your lungs, and you'll revive and be able to save yourself. Because I was actually at the manufacturing facility up in Canada, and they said, watch this. And he put it into a nosedive, and your first reaction is to grab, as a pilot, is to grab it and keep it from, because you got the full video, the simulation going on in front of you, and you're like, oh God, oh God. And at 10,000 feet, it just leveled right out. It's like, that's cool. Okay, here's the best part of the whole thing. SR-71 Blackbird. SR-70 stands for Strategic Reconnaissance. Although urban legend says President Johnson switched the letters, and all those as scientists at Skunk Works all wanted RS for research ship, Air Force Chief of Staff Curtis LeMay preferred Strategic Reconnaissance and successfully lobbied for the change. Maximum altitude is, the maximum altitude is classified, although the highest recorded was 85,000 feet. Commercial aircraft max out at 42,000 feet. Maximum speed is classified, although the fastest recorded was Mach 3.2, which is 2,435 miles an hour. The slowest speed ever recorded, accidentally, was 175 miles an hour. That was an accident, but they didn't come out of the sky, so good. It's also nicknamed the Sled. There we go.
Determines the maximum altitude of the plane. gave us several examples where planes have exceeded their maximum altitude, but what does the plane run out of? Why does it have a maximum? Why is that?
Because you have to, there are three things required for a fire. All aircraft, every engine runs on fire. So there are three things required: fuel, ignition source, and oxygen. Okay? Up too high, remember I said there's not enough oxygen. So that's what happens is you only go so high. And also the structure of the aircraft. When you get up, because you now have a pressurized aircraft, they pressurize aircraft to 8,000 feet. So this is why your ears pop before you ever get up. You're like, we're taking off. Why are we getting our ears are popping? We're not high enough. Because they're pressurizing the aircraft. And so if it goes up too high, you've got pressure on the inside of the aircraft and it's not manufactured strong enough to withstand that internal pressure versus the external pressure. You're going to start springing leaks everywhere. So it's a safety thing. And there's actually, that's the maximum certified altitude. It probably can go another, aircraft can probably go another 10,000 feet above that, 5,000 feet. But that's one of those things like you get on an elevator, it says maximum weight is 9,000 pounds. It's actually like 3 times that much, but they don't want you to overload it with a bunch of, lead weights. So don't push your luck. So that's why it's the maximum altitude is certified. You can probably go higher. Fuel. There was a flight coming out of LA, and he flew LA to, where did he fly? He fly LA to Sacramento, Idaho, Montana, Denver, Albuquerque, LA, back to Seattle, back to Sacramento, in a total of 2.5 hours. That's screaming fast. While listening to LA Control, they heard a Cessna asking for his ground speed. LA Center says, November Charlie 175, I'm showing you at 103 miles an hour on the ground. Then a twin engine, you start hearing a little testosterone kicking in here. Then a twin engine Bonanza gets on the radio and asks what the ground speed is. LA Center says, Twin Beach, we show you at 125 knots, 143 miles an hour. Then an F-18 out of Lamar Airfield asks for a speed check. And you can definitely hear the testosterone kicking in now. Dusty 52, your speed is 720 miles an hour across the ground. Then he says he heard a click from the guy, his back seater. And he says, tell us our airspeed. Said there was a pause. And he said, Aspen XX, we show your speed at 2,119 miles an hour across the ground. And he said, it was dead silence on that radio after that. The SR-71 is so fast that when coming home from Europe, and it wanted to land in Texas, it would start its turn over Chicago. And remember, we know that the maximum altitude is classified. So the pilot came and asked for clearance to flight level 600, which is 60,000 feet. And the controller thought he was joking. He said, if you think you can get up to 60,000 feet, go for it. And so the pilot comes back and says, Roger, descending to flight level 600. Here's one. You can take I'll skip this one because it's Pearl Harbor. Paul Rasmussen was one of the few pilots to shoot down a Japanese plane at Pearl Harbor. He did it in an obsolete plane while still in his pajamas. And that brings Groucho Marx comments to light. In 1953, Thomas Attridge's jet was shot down during a test flight. It was later found that he had run into his own bullets he had fired earlier. Don't even want to ask. Cornfield bomber. In 1958, a pilot ejected from his F-108 bomber when it went into a flat spin. And then he watched the aircraft correct itself and land itself by itself in the cornfield. We'll skip Turkish Airways. They wanted to showcase the new 787, so they invited a film crew on, and they had the production crew, the film crew, the lighting, the sound, the director, everything, costume, makeup, everything. Well, they put the lights next to the windows. It was too hot lights, so they melted the windows. Not a good idea to do an inaugural flight. I'll shorten this one up. While taxiing out behind a Lufthansa aircraft in Frankfurt, a Hercules, C-130 Hercules, noticed an orange remove before flight pin flag sticking out, which means you have not removed you can't steer the aircraft with there's a nose gear still pinned shut. And he says, he don't want to embarrass the guy. So he calls it pilot to pilot. He said, please, this so-and-so, this is Herky, whatever it says, Lufthansa aircraft, Herky 23. No response. They repeated the transmission. Again, there was no reply. Instead, the Lufthansa pilot comes on to the tower and asks the tower to tell the Herky crew that the professional pilots of Lufthansa do not engage in unprofessional conversations over the radio. The 130 pilot quickly responded, Frankfurt Tower, can you please relay to the professional pilots at Lufthansa Aircraft that their nose gear pin is still installed? And one more for Frankfurt. They were a hot-tempered lot, and they showed that, well, let me skip that one. Some very funny conversations with ATC, and here are a few. Student pilot, remember I told you what to do in case of an emergency. Student pilot, I'm lost. I'm over a lake and headed toward the big E on my compass. ATC said, make several 90-degree turns so I can identify you. There's a short pause. ATC says, okay, that big lake is the Atlantic Ocean. Suggest you turn immediately towards the big W. Now, remember how flight levels are called in numbers of hundreds of feet? So the Cessna calls up and says, ATC, Cessna, whatever. I'm at flight level 3,700, which translates to 370,000 feet. Tower comes back, Roger, contact Houston Space Center. Pilot in a holding pattern says, and then he's in a holding pattern, he's waiting for whatever's going, too many people. Tower, request an ETA. Tower says, Cessna XX, do you have a situation that requires priority? And all you parents in here, your dads will understand. Pilot, does daddy I have to go count? Tower says, immediate approach cleared. And then the final one. This is just a joke. Minister dies and is waiting in line at the pearly gates. Ahead of him is a guy who's dressed in sunglasses, a loud shirt, leather jacket, and jeans. St. Peter dresses this guy. Who are you, so that I may know whether you are not to admit you to the kingdom of heaven? The guy replies, I'm Joey Shasta, retired pilot of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. St. Peter consults his list. He smiles and says to the pilot, take this silken robe and golden staff and enter the kingdom. The pilot goes into heaven with his robe and staff. Now it's the minister's turn. He stands erect and booms out, I am Joseph Snow, pastor of St. Mary's for the last 43 years. St. Peter consults his list. He says to the minister, take this cotton robe and wooden staff and enter the kingdom. Just a minute, says the minister. That man was a pilot. He gets a silken robe and a golden staff. And so St. Peter says, up here we work by results. When you did your job, you taught people how to pray. When he did his job, he made people pray. Thanks for your time.